All right. All right. Welcome to today's Azure and M365 user group. It is July 15th, 2020. And just to recap group mission here, we're trying to create an inclusive learning environment for those interested in cloud technologies on Azure and Microsoft 365. We want to create and provide content for the global community members on a monthly basis. We're expanding knowledge for users across Michigan, the United States, and around the world. And everyone is welcome to share session dates with colleagues and contacts. It doesn't have to be a technologist. We'll try, everybody has a time to learn, and we're not doing any sales pitches on these calls. So just information, just learning, and we will post every session on YouTube at this link, and this link will go out to everybody after the call. Oops, skipped ahead there. So today we have Vukasin Terzic from Prague, Czechoslovakia. Czech Republic, sorry, it's Czech Republic. He is a cloud and solution architect and Azure enthusiast with 2 decades of IT experience. He specializes in Microsoft Azure, hyperconverged infrastructure, and PowerShell. He is currently working at KPCS and also teaching Microsoft courses at GOPAS. And he is a father, rescue scuba diver, and a public speaker. So welcome, Vukasin, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Dwayne. It's my pleasure to be here. So I'm switching over to my slides. I hope you can now see my screen.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you for introduction. Today's topic is something that I really like to talk about, and also something that I like to practice. And before we actually go to the governance itself, let's talk about what are the challenges and why we actually need it, why we need Azure governance. Introduction of the public cloud dramatically changed the speed at which companies tend to adopt new technologies and extend their infrastructures. I guess some of you who are watching this had a chance to order new servers before to their local data center. And you know that this can take weeks, but the entire process can take even a full year. And we have to wait for a budget approval, we have to select the hardware, compare prices, get the vendor, sign the contract, prepare space in a rack. Someone has to put it in there, to connect it, to install it, test it, license it. We also have a network equipment, storage, and this list can go on and on. And we also need in-house knowledge for this for us to be able to do all of this and take care of it. And this is slow, right? And the good thing about this slow process is that we have time to prepare for it. We have time to keep up with our compliance requirements during the planning and implementation phase. Because it takes time, we already have the processes for it because we are doing this for a while now. In the public cloud, on the other hand, creating any number of virtual machines of any type or operating system takes a few minutes. But that's it. And that's great. It gives companies possibility to react to their need quickly and extend their environment to exactly how they need when they need it. But what's dangerous about this is that everyone starts to like this speed immediately, and it gets under your skin, and then you start click, 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 click. You deploy servers, networks, applications, and with that speed, we can lose a track of the control of it. And that leads to uncontrolled and confusing environment that doesn't comply with any rules or requirements of our organization. And most probably this will end up having a negative impact on the total cost of Azure services. And so today we are here to talk about that. We want to ensure that we can still use the benefits of the speed and flexibility of the public cloud, but that doesn't turn against us. And so we will take a look about how to keep cost under control, about some basic security rules that we need to enforce on scale, like the things, for example, making sure that our virtual machines don't have RDP open to the internet. We will also talk about consistency across our resources. We don't want to have resources in different regions, each VM in different signs and naming convention and so on. And we will cover identity baseline a little bit in the end. So what can happen, and it will probably happen. I already mentioned this. The speed got under our skin, and we cannot stop creating new resources. Sometimes we delete something because we don't need it anymore. But sometimes we forget to do that. And then we get like disks, public IP addresses, maybe network cards, maybe some resource groups full of stuff. And we don't know who does it belong to, so we leave it there. And it stays there forever. Other thing that happens usually is that people create virtual machines for them as they need them, whenever they like and whatever size they like. We might have resource naming policy somewhere in a document that is saved somewhere on a SharePoint, but who would remember that, because we have so many resources. And I don't know if people are watching this are new to Azure, but for example, when you create a virtual machine, simple server in Azure, you have to have network, subnet, IP address, network card, virtual machine, disk, resource group to put it in. And this list like goes on, and so many resources get created. And each of those different resource types should have different naming convention, but no one in the world can remember all of that. And looking up for that document every time we want to create something is really like time consuming and boring. So another thing that happens is that people start creating resources, and they create it in different regions around the world. And regions in Azure are different data centers that are spread in different locations. And when you create something like in different regions, this can have an impact on availability, definitely impact on speed, and also on a cost. Some resources have different pricing models, but also if you create something in one region and then you find out that that service is not it's not possible to use it cross-region, you end up creating the same service in a different region and you pay for the same thing twice. So that's what's starting to happen. And then another thing that can easily happen if you don't have any control over your Azure is that someone goes and needs a virtual server, so they create a virtual machine that costs you $1,000 per hour. And that's easy. That's just one click, and you have a virtual machine with 12 terabytes of RAM, 4 graphics cards, and that's great. I would really love to use that kind of virtual machine, but the question is if you really need that. And then when all this happens, it's the end of the month, invoice come in, and the cost is too high. And what happens next is absolute panic. We need to delete something. We need to start deleting things because they cost us money. And in cloud, we use, or the public clouds use, operational expenses module, which allows you to pay only for what you use. So when you delete something, you are not using it, you don't pay for it anymore. And in this moment, with all the previous things I said, you don't have any control and knowledge of what is really being used. And so what do? You go and create a ticket and send it to help desk. check what's not being used and delete it, because we need to save money. And of course, help desk, they don't know anything about your applications you use, but they have to delete something. So they take a look, they find out a virtual machine that is turned off for almost a month, and they said, yeah, we found something, and then delete that virtual machine. And here we are, they just deleted the system that is, let's say, being used once a month to calculate and send employee salaries. Right, and this is a realistic scenario that can happen anytime. Another problem with uncontrolled Azure usage is that you have much more power in your hands and much more ways to lose the control. So if you have a compliance in your company that, for example, data that you are working with are sensitive and they cannot leave your country, for example, they cannot leave US or they cannot leave European Union, which is compliance here in Europe. That's something like, for example, all schools they have to comply with. They cannot leave students' data to leave the European Union and so on. And with your local data center, of course, you have everything saved there. You don't even think about this being possible to happen. But in Azure, yes, that's very easy. And you can just click on a different region and save data in Asia. And so these things do not comply with your company, and you are then in trouble. So you see, there are many things that we have to deal with all the time. And in on-premises, those things don't happen so much, and the impact is probably lower because impact on cost is lower because we have hardware limitations, and you cannot easily buy new hardware, and so on. And so how do we deal with this? What we can do to somehow stop these things from happening? There are a few ways to do that. And one option is to how to deal with this is to, and this is how you would do it on premises typically, is to have a team or a person who is whose role is to take care of the cloud. And they will be responsible, this team or person will be responsible for the entire cloud environment. They will know all the rules and all the requirements, and all the requests to create something or change something in cloud will go through this team. And this is great. I'm not saying this cannot work. I think this can work everything in a small environment. And you have a huge benefit that you have a person or team of people who know everything about it, and they are go-to if you need to find out about something. But in a huge environment with a lot of different requests, they can get easily overwhelmed, and we lose the speed and flexibility of the cloud because the new requests get stuck here, and we are not using that speed that we want to from the cloud. Then there is another option, and I think that's a better option, and that's using the tools for automated control of the environment. These tools are there for us to use, and they are most of the time, or tools that we will be talking about today are free to use. And they can help us force the set of rules which we can define, and with those rules we can define who and how can create Azure resources, and then application owners or developers or whoever needs to use our cloud can have their own access and can deploy their resources or make their changes at their own speed, and so we are not creating that bottleneck. But when they do that, they will have to comply with those rules that we set, and that's great because if everything is done well, then we end up with nice controlled environment without losing the speed and flexibility of the cloud. And we can apply those rules and policies to different scopes, like management groups, subscriptions, even individual resource groups and individual resources. So what are those tools? So we have a few of them. First one, and I like to start with this one, is Azure Resource Graph. And I like to start with it because before you can control your environment and before you can actually know how your environment is behaving, you need to know what you have there and how much you pay for it. And we have to ask ourselves that question every time and then continuously optimize our Azure usage and our Azure spending. And so we can, to go through resources, to be able to do that, you need to go through resources. And we can go and like do it in Azure portal, where you can list and see all your resources. Or you can list everything you have by PowerShell or Azure CLI. And those tools are great. And in most of the cases, they will be enough. But that requires some extra knowledge, like using Azure PowerShell. And on a large scale, maybe it's not the fastest solution. So there is another tool that Microsoft created, and it's called Azure Resource Graph. And it's great because it runs in the background and create indexes of whatever you have in Azure. And it runs all the time. You don't have to do anything. And you can then use it to search, explore, and analyze your resources. So let's take a look at the Azure Resource Graph. I have some simple subscription here that I use mostly for testing. And the easiest way to find it is to search for Resource Graph. And now we are here. And in this page, you have a couple of things that you should look at. First one is Explorer. The second one is the query, and this uses custom query language, which is not difficult to learn, and this is very well documented. But instead of trying to write your own at first, I suggest you go and see some starter samples, and this is great because Microsoft shows you here very nice examples of what you can achieve with the custom query or with the resource graph, and and it gets you hooked in, and then you start exploring on your own, and then you can get whatever you need to do on your own. So let's not, or actually let's see what we can write here first. So resources. And this is going to count all my resources in the subscription. No, I missed something. It's not count. Okay, so I completely forgot how to write. This count. Okay, we can do it like this as well. Did I really forget? Okay. First demo, easiest demo, doesn't matter. What we can do instead, we can explore. So before I go ahead and copy some sample for you here, summarize count. Before I actually go and copy something, what you can also do here is to explore it through the Explorer. So resources. And then you can go here and let's say we want to find virtual machines I have. The easiest way to do that, if demo works, is to go to resources, find Microsoft Compute, virtual machines, and show all the virtual machines that I have in my, which is not going to be many, right? Sorry about that. Right, so you can see that I have 2 virtual machines in this subscription. And that's nice. Is it useful for me? Probably yes, but there are also different things that I can do with this and get more information, something that I'm interested in more. And listing the virtual machines is also very easy from Azure Portal. But if you want to get some more interesting information, like count virtual machines by OS type, right? That can be tricky to get if you are using Azure Portal and get it in this way. So for us, Azure Resource Graph saves the day. Right? And nice thing about this is that you can always export the results. And for example, you can create charts. And this is not a very interesting chart now, but you can imagine that we can have different type of information that we can display here. And then we can present that in a graphical way. And having that presented like this, it's very useful if you want to present something to your colleagues or your management as well. Another great thing is that we can pin this to our dashboard, and it's easy as that. I'm going to pin it in, or let's create a new dashboard. It's going to be called demo. And now I have a dashboard. So if I go here, if I go to demo, I can see that it shows here now. And if you go and try to search for those query samples, you can also, and it's also an official Microsoft website, you can find a dashboard, or not the dashboard, but a query sample that creates the full dashboard of all very useful information. And of course, depends what kind of resources you have and what kind of information you like to show. But imagine to have here like all information about all your virtual machines, your networks, your subnets. This can be very useful. And you saw it, it was very easy to get up and running in a minute or two with Azure Resource Graph samples.
And those dashboards are interactive, correct?
Right.
Where you can drill
exactly.
right down on the graphs and gather more information right from the
exactly.
dashboard.
Yeah.
Yep.
So this is good. I really like it, and most of the time, this is something that I don't need to use like often. Because exactly like this, you can create dashboards and you can see all the relevant information on your front page, and then you can look at that every day and see if something changes. So, all right. The next tool in our Azure Governance toolset is Azure Resource Lock. And resource locks are very basic, simple little feature that we can use, but they're also very, very useful in a situation when you want to make sure that something doesn't get deleted by accident. And deleting something in Azure is very easy. For example, what happened to me recently is that I was using a PowerShell commandlet or a script to create some virtual machines, and I saved it. And then I was going to use the similar, or to delete different virtual machines, but I left the names in the script from the creation script that I used before, and I deleted wrong virtual machines. And also you can easily like click on something in Azure and get it deleted by accident. And it's gone. It's gone before even you even realize that you made a mistake. And so that's why we have Azure Resource Lock. Good thing about them is they are inherited to entire scope. And we can configure two types of locks. One is cannot delete, and the second one is read only. Cannot delete lock prevent deletion of the resource, and read only lock will prevent any changes and deletion of the resource. And that's it. And this, of course, is all we need, because if you want to delete something, the user will get an error, or if you try to do it by the script will fail. And that's, in most cases, this is enough to prevent that accidental damage. And so let's take a look how that works. I have some resource groups here. So let's take a look at the resource group 2. I have some virtual machine in it, nothing special. And what I can do is to go here, delete, and let's take a look how easy it is to delete the resource group and everything in it. I click delete, and all those things are going to be deleted in a minute. And if the resource group is huge, with a lot of resources, let's say your entire application with all its data, with all your even maybe resource log, recovery service vault and everything in it, it will get deleted in a few minutes and you lose everything you had before. Of course, that takes some time, but now it's too late to stop it. So we are going to lose it. I'm going to get a message that it was deleted, but let's not wait for that. What I can do instead for a resource group 1, it's a very similar resource group. I have a different virtual machine in it. I can enable lock. And I can do that from here, or I can do that by PowerShell. And I can add new lock. I'm going to give it a name. And I'm going to select what type of lock I want. I want to prevent deletion. This is not very helpful description, but it's good to add something there. Like, for example, reason why you don't want this to be locked. And so now we can see that the lock is applied to entire resource group. And if I now go and try to delete the resource group itself, I will get the message. Or if I go and try to delete, let's test that first, one of the resources that are inside, and as I mentioned before, this is being inherited, so I didn't apply it to individual resource, I applied it to the entire resource group. So if I try to delete this virtual machine now, it's going to ask me, do I want to delete? I say yes. Of course, it's going to let me try, and then I get an error. And if I click on the error message, oh, now I clicked on the virtual machine name. I wanted to click on the error. I'm going to see that it failed because the lock was applied, and that's basically what the error message was saying.
Yeah, if you read the message, it actually did mention the lock in there.
Yeah.
In that description of that message.
Yeah.
So it's in there. It says, please remove the lock and try again.
Exactly. Yeah, it's here. And so that's what just saved us. And then, of course, we have a different type, but this is delete lock, which allows me to change the configuration of this virtual machine. I can go and do and add more disks, do whatever, and it's going to let me do that. But if I go back to our locks, okay. You can see that I'm not using Portal so much. I'm more of a command line kind of guy. So if I go back here to logs, and now I can, to be able to delete that, I first have to go and delete, remove the lock, or I can. What you will see here is that it doesn't let me change the name of it, but I can change the type of the lock. Usually you will give it a name so it's descriptive, so it will be difficult to change the type, but for me that was one step less. And now this lock means that I cannot even change the configuration. All the resources in the resource group and the resource group itself is read-only. And that's all you need to know about the resource locks. So I'm going to delete that because we will be playing with that resource group a little bit later. Next thing we have in our Azure governance tools is Azure tags. Right, so it would be better if user already knows that the resource is important and it doesn't even try to delete it, right? But once we start creating or having large amount of resources, that will sooner or later cause the situation that we cannot keep a track of everything we have there. And I've seen huge Azure environments where no one will be able to identify if resource is still needed or not. And we don't know who, if we don't know who created the resource, who is, let's say, responsible for it on the business side or the technical side, or who pays for it, and to which application is related to, then we don't have a chance to find out, and we are afraid to delete it, so we still keep paying for it. But that's not the only the issue we have here. Sometimes you want to find all the resources that are related to a project or related to an application or maybe single virtual machine, and that can also be tricky. And if we have to work with that, it's tricky. If we have to create documentation for it, it's also tricky. And so using Azure tags can help us actually organize resources and attach sort of information, all sorts of information to them. We can then show all the resources with the same tag. We just click on the tag and shows us all the resources. We can apply tags to individual resources, to resource group, and recently, after recent change, I think it's also possible to apply tags to subscriptions. And each resource can have up to 50 tags, and we can assign them manually by a script or by the Azure Policy. And I personally really like using Azure tags because I don't have to explain to my teammates or my colleagues or my clients for what that resource is there, why I created it, when I created it, and if it's a temporary resource, how long I need it. If you look at the maybe cloud adoption framework or some other documents like this, they have some suggestions of tags that you actually should be using and can be using in your environment. I personally like always to identify if the environment is production or test or dev. I like to identify who is the owner, who is the business owner, who is the technical owner. I like to identify when the resource is created, if it's needed 24/7, or if I can safely turn it off during the night, or if I just turn it on once a day, 1 day per month. And I also like to add some notes that can contain more relevant information about the project and so on. And using tags allows you to easily identify what the application or the resource is for. And then you finish the project. It was a temporary project. You now have to delete all the resources. Easy. You click on the tag, you select all and delete. That's it. Turn off the delete lock first. Also, what's good about tags is that, of course, in some companies, there is just one IT budget and everything goes from that budget. So you don't have to track who is paying for what. But in many companies, there are different applications that are being paid from different budgets. And using tags later on in the billing section can actually help you identify and spread this Azure cost to different teams and cost centers and divide your spendings like this. So let's take a look at tags. So now if I take a look, okay, now we got the message that the test 2 is deleted. Good, we didn't have any resource lock on it. If I take a look now at my resources here, you can see that I already created some tag. I didn't go too crazy here because this was a quick demo, but I did add something. And unfortunately, if I add tag to the resource group, they are not being inherited automatically to all the resources. And if I click on the VNet here, I can see that I don't have any tags on it. If I added tags to the virtual machine when I was creating it, because all those resources got created at the same time as a part of the virtual machine, they would all be tagged, but I didn't do that. And now I'm in a situation where none of my resources have tags. This might be enough if I have the if I put everything related into one resource group and I know who the resource group belongs to, then I don't necessarily need to go and tag individual resources in it. But in most cases, this will not be enough, and you will still have to go and tag your resources in the resource group. And so how can I now add tags? So the easiest way, or the way that we are going to show here, is just to click here, select the tag. You will already have all the tags that you use in your environment here for you to choose from, so you don't have to create again. And you can add tags this way. And again, if I do that, it's only going to add it for this single resource, not for everything related to it, because we are now doing it manually. The other way to do, the second way of how you can do this is by using Azure Powershell. And with Azure Powershell, it's actually pretty simple to identify, actually to get the list of the tags you have on your resource group, and then apply them to every resource in your resource group. So you can see this is a couple of steps that you need to do. Identify the resource group tags, identify all the resources, and then go for each and apply it to each resource.
Hey, Vukasin, I do have a question from
Sure.
We had another attendant join, and he wanted to know, can you apply a lock to the tags, or is that just for the resource group and the resources?
Right. So the tag itself is not a resource. Tag is something unique in Azure. It's basically just a metadata data that is actually attached to that resource. So you cannot apply things like that to tag. But if you want to prevent tag from being removed from a resource, there is definitely a way to do that. And that's actually a good question, good time question, because next thing that we are going to talk here is Azure Policy. And an Azure Policy can be used exactly for that. So what is Azure Policy? Or what are Azure Policies? Azure Policies allow us to enforce rules for creating and configuring the Azure resources. So that's the simple description. But the policy itself is actually the definition of the rule. And that can be any rule that we want to apply. And it can be, for example, when we're talking about tags, we can define that these resources that are being created here must have following tags. And you can define the list, you can define the even values of tags, and you can enforce that. One way to enforce it is to actually just like make it enforced, which means it's required. And if the person who is creating the resource, like virtual machine, doesn't enter this tag, during the entering, it will not get like any kind of suggestion you have to enter the tag because it's in the policy. But when he press create, that the creation will fail, and the error message will say the policy named like this requires this kind of tag, and you didn't add it, and that's why it's your resource creation failed. Another good examples of what Azure Policy can be used for are, for example, defining allowed Azure regions. Before we mentioned that we don't want our data to leave United States, then we can say in the policy, when you create resource, only allowed Azure regions are those located in United States. Or we can say that some very expensive or unnecessarily expensive Azure virtual machine sizes are forbidden, or we can just specify that we know that for our usage, we just need this machine size, so we can allow just that one. Or we can require those tags, a list of the tags. And another thing that I like to use Azure Policy for is enforcing naming convention. And it's a little bit tricky to define this, and because there are so many resource types in Azure. But once you create like comprehensive list of all the naming schemas you want to use, using Azure Policy to define it is really, really useful. And so each policy can basically do three things. One is enforced rule, which means that if the rule is not followed, user will get an error. The other way to use it is to use Azure Policy in audit mode, and that will actually let you create a resource, and it will only audit it and inform the admin, notify the admin about the thing you did differently than you were supposed to do. And in the real world, or rather in ideal world, we would like to enforce everything. We create the rules before things get messy, and we enforce everything. But in reality, if you didn't start immediately, actually before you started using something in Azure, this will be very difficult to enforce immediately. And you can, like, if you enforce the new rules that were not there before, you can suddenly interrupt the workflow. People were used to do something, and now they cannot do it, and they need to do it, and basically you stop them from doing their work. And that's why we have audit mode, which help us with learning what those users really need, and then we can create enforced rules later. And another thing that Azure Policy can be used, or a way that can be used, is to modify stuff. And this was not there from beginning, but now there is a modify way, so you can, let's say, use the Azure Policy to apply the tags, right? You can have a tag and say, apply all the tags to all of those resources. Perfect. So that's another way of, that's another part to answer to your question. And so this policy, when we create policy definition, then we have to apply the policy, which is called policy assignment. We assign the policy to a different scope. And this scope can be management group, it can be subscription, it can be a resource group. We can assign each policy individually, or we can also assign, create and assign something called policy initiative. And policy initiative is just like a group of policies that we want to assign together. And it's easier to work with it in that way, and for us to create a consistent environment. Another great thing about audit mode in Azure policies is that we can use them, or like policy initiative, to audit entire environment and find out the things about our environment and learn from it. Not just about how users are using the resources, but also about existing resources that we already have created. And for example, here in Europe, we have GDPR. And keeping track if everything is compliant with GDPR is difficult. But Microsoft prepared a set of policies for us that we can use and apply in audit mode, and we get very nice GDPR readiness results from it. So that's another way. So enough talking. Let's see how we can use policies. So I'm here in a resource group 1, and I'm going to apply policies now to this resource group. So let's start from here. I can start directly from here, but other ways to go here and search for policy. Now I see that I have something here applied. It's not compliant. Come back to that later. I was talking about assignments and definitions. So let's take a look at definitions first. These policies, and there is really a bunch of them, are pre-created for us by Microsoft. And I think that existing policies can cover most of the things we need. Of course, for at least policy types, we will have to input some things manually, like, for example, those VM sizes or naming convention and tags naming. But basically, we are not editing the policy itself. We are just editing the parameters of it. Of course, if you need and you don't find anything here, you can create your own policy. Those are written in JSON and they have their own structure. Because when I started using policies, we didn't have nearly as many examples of predefined policies as we have now. I had to write some of them on my own, which most of them I ended up replacing with those that Microsoft provided later. For me, the way of learning how to write was basically to find some quick start templates, or maybe even like a basic templates, and start editing those. And now, as you can see, the list is huge. You can find all of those on Microsoft's GitHub, and you can explore what's in there and maybe just try to editing your own little pieces on your own and using it in that way. So we are going to do a demo, as someone mentioned, on the tags. So let's take a look at that. We don't have to select all, but we can select category tags, and then let's see what we have here. Require a tag and its value on resource. Inherit a tag from subscription if missing. Inherit a tag from a resource group if missing. That sounds good for our demo. So let's take a look at that. And this is policy definition that is created for us by Microsoft. And you can see that we cannot edit this one directly. And the reason for that is that this is a template that Microsoft wants to keep untouched for us. So if you want to edit this one and make your own changes, then you can duplicate, add your own name, and go from there. I am not going to change anything. We are going to change those in parameters later. So let's take a look. Let me first see what kind of parameters I have. So I have environment test. That sounds good. Let's add a new tag called demo. No, actually no. We have environment test. We are going to apply that, but I'm going to add that tag here because we want to test. Apply if it's missing, right? So, okay, I added tag. Now let's go back to policies. I should have opened that in a new tab, doesn't matter. Let's assign a policy. And we are going to call it we are going to assign this policy. If you want to add exclusions, we can. These can be selected manually, or you can create types. So I don't want to, let's say, apply it to some resource types and so on. We have a sample demo here, so we don't have any of that, but you can basically select different scopes and different exclusions for it. We don't have that. Assignment name. We are using here, of course, everything default, but we should probably give it custom assignment name. So I'm going to call it inherit type tag from resource group if missing. Going to, I need to type that, assigned by me. Policy enforcement is enforce, enabled. which means that it will do it immediately. What I actually wanted to show you more importantly, here we add the tag name. This is the tag that is going to be identified, and the value of this tag is going to be applied to all of our resources, and the value will be taken from the resource group. But what I wanted to show you is that the modify option that was not there before, and that is to create a remediation task, which will actually go ahead and make the changes on the existing resources. Right? If we don't do this, this policy is just going to apply to the new resources that we create. But if we create a remediation task, it's going to apply to all of our resources that currently exist. Okay, I think I'm in West Europe here, so I'm not going to use that. Permissions, that's fine. Of course, to be able to do that is going to create a managed identity. And now review and create. The funny thing is that you cannot add tags to the policy, but this policy will be adding tags to our this policy will add tags to our rules here. All right, so now we can see that the policy assignment was successful and the remediation task was also successful. So let's take a look at the remediation, because this is going to take some time now. We can see that the resources to remediate currently 0, which means it didn't discover anything. But that takes some time because the policy has to go through its full cycle and see if anything is missing. Let's go back to our resource group. Environment is test. If I didn't make a mistake in typing the name of the tab, but I guess I didn't. So I can see here that this is the one that I added manually. So that one is still there. But on anything else, it should be missing, right? We can see that it's not here. Okay. Now let's go back to policies and hope this applies quickly. We can see it's still not started. I don't know if there is a way to enforce it. Probably not. Right. So I'm going to leave it like this. We will continue with the presentation, and a little bit later I'm going to come back and hopefully we will see the result here. And the outcome of this is going to be that all of those resources here will have a task or a tag assigned. What I can do, however, is to create a new resource. So what should I create? It goes quickly. Network security group. That can be created quickly. And I'm not going to add any tags. Just going to add name. I'm not adding those. And now you can see that because we have a modify, it's not going to force me to add it. It's not going to fail because I didn't add the tag. It's going to go ahead and create a resource. But now if I go to resource, I can see that the tag was added automatically. And as I said, that policy works only for new resources. The existing resources has to be covered by the remediation task. Okay, I hope that was clear. Excuse me. Azure Policy is a very powerful tool which allows us to do all sorts of things and give us a lot of control over the environment, which or without it would be really, really difficult to control and manage.
Yeah, it's extremely helpful for things like maintaining consistency, as well as governing your costs, as well as your compliance, like you were saying.
Yeah. Okay, let's give it one last refresh just to see if the remediation task was not started yet. Okay, so that takes some time, but it's simple example. So, okay, next thing we have on our list, and that's the last bit that we are going to talk about today. And I'm sorry, I'm going a little bit over time, so this is going to be quickly since we are not doing demo here with Azure Blueprints. Azure Blueprints is a feature that is still in preview, and it's in preview for a year or two already. What we can use Azure Blueprints for is that to create kind of central management throughout the whole environment or in our individual projects. And it's basically a tool for architects, for cloud architects, to define the set of roles and configurations for those Azure resources that we want to create. And once we create, maybe I have more links here. Yeah. Once we create those rules, it allows us to make like a repeatable and consistent deployments of this entire applications and infrastructures. And then individual teams, like, for example, cloud engineer or other people on the other side, can, or not the cloud architects, but the users, like developers, can use those tools that we defined, and using the Azure Blueprint, they can just click and run and create their environment. And this whole environment will be created in a way that we defined, and we can be sure that everything is deployed in the way that we wanted, and that's why we can give them a power to do it on their own. The difference between Azure Blueprints and Policy is that Blueprints is not just definition of rules, but it's using different tools, which are called here artifacts, such as ARM templates, RBAC controls. You can even use a custom scripts, and we can combine those multiple tools in one big blueprint, and then use it to create and deploy resources with it. Typically, we will not use Policy, Azure Policy, to create a resource. But Blueprint is there for us to combine all those tools and just to create resources with it. There are also some predefined blueprints, which are great. They help us deploy an environment which is compliant immediately with different requirements. And Microsoft created those for us. And there was a point in time when I saw blueprints coming up quickly to Azure, and then Microsoft stopped that, removed some of them, and actually I don't know what's the situation now, if we have more or less than we had before. But as I mentioned, this feature is still in preview and still being worked on by Microsoft every day. But it's great. I played it with it, I tested it. I like using ARM templates to deploy resources consistently. These are great. Even custom scripts like PowerShell scripts to deploy things. But using Blueprint gives you like the full package of everything wrapped in one in one tool, and I think it's really great. And once it's added to general availability, I think it will be one of the favorite tools for Azure architects. Right. And so that's it. That was the last tool that I wanted to talk about today. I hope, and my goal today was to bring up the importance of Azure governance, and to give you some information and overview of the tools so you can easily and quickly start with it. Do not be afraid of it. It's great, it's easy, and it works for you, not against you.
Oh yeah, great information. Definitely information that when I'm doing a class for architect or administrator. It's important to talk through a lot of that information as well, and go through uh, the importance of locks and all of those things to avoid accidental removing of a production environment, right?
Yeah.
So you don't want that to happen
No,
in your environment at all. And so appreciate you taking the time today, Vukasin. Thank you very much. And you know what, coming up next month, we've got Wim and Tim doing a talk on privileged identity management, and then we have some other speakers coming up in the coming months, but our next meeting is going to be on August 19th. Some other things to take into account, some other user groups that I'm involved in, and talks that I'm involved in, is Cloud Lunch and Learn. It's a great group that Hugo Barona has started in the UK. I've been doing some solution architect sessions on that to prepare for that exam.
Sessions, Dwayne, on this.
Oh, great! Well, thank you, thank you. Well, we're got the next one coming up on Friday. I'll be talking a little bit about policy because it's on security and identity. So I'll be touching on some of the things that you touched on today. This group here, the Sci-Fi DevCon, one of my coworkers is putting on a conference, a 2-day virtual conference with a lot of industry leaders around DevOps, and this is a conference that you have to purchase tickets for. But what he's trying to do with this conference is actually use the money from the conference to build a well in a like third world country to get some clean drinking water for a country that needs it. He's working with I forgot what the group is, but that's what he's trying to raise money for. So it would help a good cause. I think he's offering the tickets for around $100, but for a great cause. And he's got a whole bunch of speakers and probably some people that names that you'll recognize around the social media circuit. So and Skyline Summer Sessions, I've also been involved in this as well. They've been doing some weekly YouTube sessions. There was a great one yesterday that Shannon Keene did on VMware on Azure. Another public preview, as you were talking about blueprints, another public preview service around utilizing VMware services right in the Azure environment. So, and then coming up in September, I think I've got you slated for one of the dates on this as well, Vukasin. The Azure Back to School will be coming up, so I'll be tagging you on that one here in the next few weeks to get you ready to get your content going for that. So
sure.
So that's about it. I did create a Twitter tag for this user group as well. So I'll be starting to put some there. I have a group on LinkedIn for this user group that everybody's welcome to join, and hope by this time next month I'll have a actual website launched for this rather than utilizing my blog site for getting this out to everybody. And we'll get things and get this group growing, get more people involved, keep this international feel of everything. So I will appreciate everybody's help and in spreading the word and getting things going. And I appreciate your time today, Vukasin. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure to be here.
Okay.